All right, so this is a really interesting Plat Reset. It was the first reset that we had since the 10x for Taurus and Marichka. And we saw a lot of accounts that typically wouldn't be in upper plat sitting up there quite a bit throughout the week, and even some during reset, just based off the strength of that duo. So I spent almost the entire week gearing and regearing different champs and testing almost exclusively against that pair, just using different tech, not always the most obvious champs or the most obvious compositions, but just trying to find little ways to break through the pair. And I think I discovered a lot of things that worked, and I didn't quite get through the entire list of things that I wanted to test. So over the next week or two, as builds change and as people learn, things are going to change. But this first team seems kind of like a week one, relying heavily on Ramontu and targeting teams that don't necessarily have a lot of sheep yet for some of these champs. The nice thing about this is, even though I don't think he's the best nuker right now, I think Leorius is really well positioned against Taurus and Marichka. And you'll kind of see why in this. We tried to get rid of Marichka's passive, and Stone Skin is a 50-50, and Sheep adds some variance into it too. But since we're not running a Necrit, the nice thing about this is we can basically force Taurus and Marichka to get Leorius to 1 HP. Not all, but most of the teams that are running Taurus and Marichka can't really deal with killing him once he's got his passive procced. And then we can let, after he nukes the team, if for some reason we don't get Marichka's passive off, we can just let Marichka kill him, and then wait to revive him until our cooldown is off of Ramontu. So it can go from like a 20-30 second fight to maybe a minute, but in upper plat that's still a reasonable time to finish that fight, and it's relatively consistent. This team, if I remember correctly, absolutely dumpsters me. I don't think I respected this Rotos enough. I literally put gear on this Rhonda for the first time about 2 hours before this reset, and by the point of this fight, I've maybe tested her in 4 fights total. So this was, I think she's really strong. I was actually really impressed with her, but that ally attack there absolutely screwed me over. I think she's really strong. I just don't have the reps in with her yet. So even though I think if I had played that differently, it might have gone better. I just switched off of her and went with a Necrit in her place just to be a little bit more consistent. Typically this team here with Duchess, Yumiko, Necrit, and Georgia, it's kind of what I farmed most of the plat with, or at least it was before Taurus and Marichka started popping up everywhere. It's really consistent. It can deal with most things. It is a little weak to Rotos, which is why I opted to bring in the Rhonda in the first fight. But like I said, I'm still trying to learn the best way to approach her kit, like which order to use her skills in. So instead of trying to learn on the fly during reset, I figured I would just switch, get my revenge real quick. I do think Rotos is surprisingly, if built right, he's surprisingly one of the better champs to use against Georgia meta. So I always try to give him just a little bit of respect. This team was really tanky. It's really well built. Both times that Rotos was able to chew through my Duchess eventually. Really strong Rotos. And I think even on this fight, I just kind of squeak out here at the end with a little bit of luck and just being careful not to AoE there instead of taking care of the Rotos. I still think Georgia is better than Baron. I think he's the best nuker in the game right now. I think it's close. Baron's really good, but I recently opted to strip gear off my Baron to test all of the other champs that I wanted to use to target Taurus and Marichka, or the duo, this week, and I don't miss him. I don't miss him at all. I just don't think he's great right now. So another champ that I put gear on this week, or actually I didn't even put gear on. Another champ that I've been testing this week was Lydia, and I think Lydia might be helpful after people start getting a lot of souls and a lot of sheep on their Marichka, after they start building her right. Right now I see a lot of them that I don't think are built right. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on that because I want to stay a little bit ahead. But I think a lot of people are building her wrong. A lot of people just don't have the blessings for her yet, and for Taurus yet. And when that changes, I think Lydia might be a better option than Ramantu. But I didn't have time to mess with Lydia prior to this reset. So she is actually in the gear I used to use her in like a year ago in Fire Knight. I didn't touch her at all. And I will probably change her this week because she's definitely not built the way that I think would be optimal for dealing with the duo. But I think she, between her and Ramantu, with the Leorius team, I think both of them have a lot of game against the duo. Given how much testing I did this week and how many changes I made, I really only landed on the Leorius team within a day. I tested a lot of other champs, some cheesy, some turned out really good, but not quite as good as this. But here you can see again, like it's really easy to get Leorius down to that 1 HP, and when I'm using Yumiko to shut everybody's passive off, it's really easy to prevent that from being stripped off of him. Or when I'm using Yumiko to shut everybody's skills off, like it's really easy to keep that Kymar from stripping him. And again, if we fail to put the block passive on Marichka, you know, it's still really easy to just let him die and wait to revive him, and keep Marichka alive for 30 seconds while I cycle through A1s until we can kill her without reviving the whole team. So I think it works really well. Specifically, like I think it's better that way than using a Necrit or than using like a fast Duchess to protect. We want Leorius to get hit. We want him to be at 1 HP, not just because it increases his damage, but also because it allows us to have him vulnerable to Marichka if she survives or if she, is still in Stone Skin after the team gets nuked. Yeah, during this reset, I think I didn't do great. Typically, I do really well on offense. And because there's so much new stuff going on and people don't leave up their defenses, at least a lot of the good like Plat players don't leave up their defenses during midweek. There's still a little bit of learning that I had to do like on the fly. And so I think there's like 2 or 3 fights maybe during reset where like I just failed on offense. I didn't do very well. Some of them I made a mistake. Some of them I just chose the wrong team from the gate. But overall, I think that this team for now and variations of this team are going to work really well. There's an awkward synergy or dyssynergy here with Lydia, and I didn't have time to test this, but I assume if Lydia is sheeped, her passive will not work. So I didn't nuke here because I wanted to make sure I didn't run into an issue with that. So it puts me in a situation where, and this is like I said, sometimes I just don't revive until I'm ready to kill everybody. But it puts me in a situation where I don't know if, using her A2 and just risking the sheep is better, or maybe building her with no accuracy and just letting her protecting the team be, and her passive be the whole point of her being there. But those are things I'm going to tinker with this week. Regardless, I think she's really strong. But in terms of like having my AI presets set up for this, I don't think they're set up very well, which cost me some time in a couple of these fights. And using Lydia's A2 at the wrong time cost me in that fight for sure. because I would have just nuked with Leorius instead of having to wait until she was no longer a sheep. The nice thing is though, like if you leave Leo dead, that sheep, she's a like Taurus will always go after the sheep, so she's a really easy target to get unsheeped pretty quickly because of how hard he hits. This happens, I'm still, like this wasn't even a duo team, so I didn't necessarily need to use the Ramattu, but he's so strong, if things don't work out with him, most of these fights still go within a minute, and if they do work out with him, I've had him as fast as 9 seconds against the duo. So there's a lot of value in just right now, at least, while sheep blessings are relatively rare, there's a lot of value in just going for the Gamba, I think. Eventually that'll change, and somebody like Lydia or some of the other alternatives that people have been tinkering with will probably be better, but I think Ramantu is perfectly fine right now until people start getting their teams built better. And again, this reset was kind of like I think this is one of the teams that I played very poorly. Excuse me. This reset was kind of like a testing. Because so many of like the top players were hiding their defense midweek, and I only got to practice on a lot of like I probably ran 200 fights against the duo, but most of them were not the premier accounts and the premier arena players. So I went into this reset actually expecting to do relatively bad, and just telling myself that I was going to push myself to do some of the things that I needed to do to get some of that experience against the field, even if it meant not placing as well this week. Like this was one of those fights that like this team's just super tanky. I wasn't respecting. I wasn't paying enough attention to reaction. I wasn't respecting it enough, and I just end up backing out of this after this clearly is not going to go my way. Up to this point, like we got a full revive in, we got a full like cooldown reset in, but you really can't mess up against Taurus and Marichka. They're too punishing. If things don't go your way for long enough, it just becomes too hard to come back from. Their turn meter boost makes it really hard to like revive in a reasonable amount of time and get back ahead of them. So once like Leorius' passive is dead, he just keeps getting killed repeatedly. You have to be really careful about when you choose to revive him. And with no protection on the team from Necrit, you can't really like protect your Arbiter and keep that revive safe for very long. Once Lydia's dead, once Leorius is dead, they're coming for Arbiter. Just this week, I ended up getting my last Faction Guardian for like the day of reset. Honestly, I got my last Faction Guardian for Shadowkin. I got another dupe Yumiko, so I was able to +2. And I also in the same day got her 6-star blessing. So I added like 30 speed to my Yumiko without changing her gear in one day, which is kind of insane, but it was great because I got to kind of test her limits during this reset. It all happened like the day of reset, so I didn't have a ton of time. Maybe 50 fights that day total, just to kind of tinker with her at most. I also the same day that morning, so I got Yumiko in the evening, and that morning I got George's 4th star, which is great for the extra crit damage. That was the other blessing that I was really hoping for. So this is an interesting situation where I get put on cooldown. They happen to be faster. And I've been trying to convince people that Mortu's just not good anymore, and this is why. In this situation, I got beat to the punch. They have a very strong team with a bunch of meta champions, but they put absolutely no pressure on me and no threat. So that cooldown does almost nothing. George's A1 is so strong, and Necrit's ally attack and cooldown, self-cooldown abilities are so strong but it only takes me a couple of seconds here, with as fast as my Yumiko is, to dig out of this. And by that point in time, if you put somebody on cooldown and you don't capitalize on it, because Mortu doesn't capitalize on anything, all that's happened is I've got all my skills now off cooldown. Yours are all put on cooldown because of my Yumiko, and your Mortu no longer has Stone Skin. So all you effectively did by combining a cooldown with Mortu is you made me wait the amount of time that the Stone Skin would have made me wait anyway, and you didn't present any threat. So I really think people need to stop relying on Mortu. Taurus is really good against Cupidus. Obviously, Mortu is really good against Cupidus. So if your team can't beat Cupidus, you can put some respect in there. But I don't think pairing Mortu with a Warlord or a Yumiko is the right move. Not after Georgid came out. I just think Georgid hits too hard with his A1. And I don't have Taurus. I've only got Marichka, but I think it's probably a very similar situation with Taurus, where his skills, he just hits so hard without his AoE that really you can afford to ignore the Mortu until you're ready to deal with it. This is another one of those situations where I'm trying out the Rhonda. I'm more learning in this situation. I don't know if it's right, but I like the idea that Rhonda has multiple hits that get around the UDK here, which is why I went with her. Again, I don't have a ton of reps with her, but I think she's very strong. I'm looking forward to this week testing with her more. In terms of Taurus, I leaned really heavy on Yumiko this reset. I think Taurus's AoE is absolutely broken. It is beyond broken. I think a lot of people obviously know that by now. And the easiest way to deal with it is just keep him locked out. A few times, you'll get 3%ed, and it's pretty apparent, just how broken he is. But the nice thing is, even if you get 3%ed, a lot of times they don't have, the full gambit of buffs that they would have if you didn't put other people in their team on cooldown. So he still doesn't quite hit as hard as he would if you hadn't brought a Warlord or a Yumiko, a lockout champ to the fight. Pythian's really interesting, because in this situation, I think there were a decent number of sheep blessings to where I didn't want. Here, I'm just waiting for reaction, but I didn't want to necessarily come in with Ramantu. But then you have the problem of Pythian's blessing being really strong, or his passive being really strong, as well as any one of these champs potentially could be built with substantial resistance. My Yumiko has a lot of accuracy, but she's very much built for speed as opposed to accuracy. So in this situation, I'm basically just trying to kill this Pythian faster than he gets his skills off cooldown, because I don't want him to revive and then beat Lydia to the punch on her passive. It ended up being that Marichka died first, triggering that passive, but either way, I'm just trying to prevent this. I was trying to prevent that Pythian from getting a revive in. And in that situation, the fight didn't necessarily go perfectly my way, but it was pretty consistent. Minute and 13 seconds. Given what's happening in the meta right now, I think that's a pretty reasonable time for a good fight in Plat. I think the days of 15-second bomb runs are going to be few and far between, and from my push this week, I took some of the gear off my bomb team. I wasn't worried about trying to look for those very narrow opportunities, and I wanted to focus more on the Taurus Marichka teams. I think this fight's a really good example. I fought a lot of teams like this with the Harima and the duo as well, and they're pretty manageable. But I think this fight specifically is a testament to how strong the passive is, or not the passive, but the skill kit is of Marichka. A lot of people don't realize putting up that that protected strength and buff and the shield, like all that stuff is really good, and I think that ended up causing me to struggle with this fight. And I don't think I realized it at the time, but if I remember right, this fight looks like it was actually I started it after reset had ended, so I didn't have my chest yet, so I didn't notice it. But when I was watching this back, I don't even think I started this fight until after reset was over, so I don't know if it impacted or even would have impacted at all. But by the time this fight comes to an end, I think I checked the clock, and it was like 3 minutes after reset, which for me is like 3 a.m. So I'm not always the most attentive at that time. So I did get held out pretty bad here, since I didn't lock out the Marichka early, and she got to put up the strength in and continuously use all of her skills. So this didn't really matter, but I think I fought this same team multiple times throughout the week with their exact build, and usually it went fine. So I don't know if I got 3% or they changed something right before reset. So defense went medium. Like I said, I have Marichka, but I don't have Taurus. So I'm still working on that. And I think I changed it halfway through reset, but I cut that out because I want to show speeds and stuff like that as I was putting their skills up. We had a few offensive fails. Like I said, I went into this planning to learn, but ultimately, I think it went really well, and we ended up taking 35th. So pretty good reset, given the new field